This is Broe. Today we're talking about an important topic, startup hives. And I've gone ahead and drawn the whole thing. Don't get overly into worrying what you're looking at. I'm going to explain it all as fast, as succinct, etc. as I can. Really important to start with a little higher overview. So I encourage you to understand where startup hives fit into the bigger picture. I was using Y in the letter Y in my other video to explain them. I'm starting with this one because it's really the most exciting. It's the first rural community living scenario. So if you're new to the concept of community living or the village or a paradise garden or living in a sustainable community on the land, these kind of concepts, this might not be the video for you. If that's up your alley, this is the video for you. So I'm going to take us through this diagram. I want you to also note, very important, I've just drawn an example of the startup hive. All startup hives might not have all these pieces, probably won't have all these pieces, especially to start out with. This would be a bigger startup hive. I'm always speaking to optimized versions, not working broken versions, which there can be many examples of. I'm always speaking to the optimized version, so also don't get discouraged if you see things that have only half of what's on here, because we're just always expanding, always reaching for more and more sustainability and regenerative healing, etc. So here we are in the context of a community that is within an hour, let's say, probably about an hour, give or take, maybe less, from a major economic center, a city or something similar, a town. And this is how it's going to be set up. Now there's a couple key pieces here. I've also tried to work with different ratios. You'll see, let's start by introducing. You can see I have over here on your right is a legend. I had space for some drawings, so I put a heart and a smiley face in there too. Don't worry so much about those. Let's start with the betas. You'll see lots of betas. These are groves of trees that are being used for tree fences, etc. So obviously that's going to change based on where you are. I use the beta symbol because it's an easy flow of the pen versus drawing a tree. You'll see a couple of these thetas throughout as well. They're just representative of your favorite tree, local tree, some kind of cool stuff. That's just in there for fun. There's also X's on this side. I've used those to denote a wild or an unknown factor, which could be a neighbor, it could be a road. Ideally, in a perfect world, it would be a forest that extends into a range of mountains or something cool. And that might be on all sides. This is just an example, and this can be happening. All that's happening here would probably not happen on any less than 10 acres. But let's start talking about startup hives. We're going to start from scratch and go through a couple pieces. So, number one, the location. These are outside of the city, give or take an hour, depending obviously where you are in the globe. It could be more or less, but not generally more of that. I use the concept of zones. So these properties would be mostly on zone 1 or 2. Zone 1 would be your counties that are usually right beside cities, where you're having higher levels of regulation, lots of acreages in the 1, 2, 4, 10, 20 size, and a lot more acreages and McMansions, less farms, maybe mixed in farmland, prairie pasture, that sort of stuff. That's your zone 1. Zone 2, you're starting to get into more places that are maybe called, in Canada, you might call them crown land, or wild spaces like that might also be parks. You're getting some bigger farms as your neighbors, that sort of stuff. So that's zone 2. That's often a bit more, an hour or hour plus from a major center. Again, depending on where you are in the globe, you might have to translate that. So that's where you're located in your startup hive. And the reason you want to be not too far from the city or the economic center is because there's frequent relationship with the city. You're thinking in acres, you're not talking in sections, you're not talking in square feet like you would be in a city hive. You're not talking about territories and boundaries as you would be in mini hives or sections. You're thinking in acres. So this could be, this example I've drawn might be best done on 20 to 160 acres, but Startup hives can be as small as a couple of acres, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 might be a minimum. You will need more to roll out more, that goes without saying. We're also, in terms of ownership models, you're usually still under fee simple title. I won't get into too much of what that means. If you know what that means, basically it means you're a tenant on the land, so you're still paying property taxes. You're probably into a pretty highly governed county, such as like Mountain View or Rocky View around Calgary, or Strathcona around Edmonton, for example, which means that you're likely potentially, still accessing the power or water or sewer, these kind of things through the county. That's not always the case. If you are in Zone 2, you'll probably have a little more sovereignty into those items. Number of people living here. So let's look at the property. This will talk a little bit about how things go. So this is your entrance. Again, I've just drawn it over here. Every property will be different. You've, over time, built a fence around the entire perimeter, creating clear boundaries between private and public, which is something that's really important to do. So all in here is public space where you might have parking, you might have a weekly market, you might have pop-up tents for a festival, that sort of stuff. Here you have a community center, and these are, you're gonna have these on every startup hive. Even the most broken ones will have these pieces. They might just be a pile of 2x4s, that's fine. Your community center, healing retreat center, I'm sure you've had visions of this kind of stuff. This is all happening here and has a very public face. You might be offering workshops, seminars, there might even be some sleeping and plumbing and that sort of stuff in here. Here you have a level 2. I've drawn it as a cul-de-sac because there's often some community infrastructure. That's what the C is standing for. These X's are essentially accommodations or domains, which could be as simple as a plug-in for an RV, could be a rentable tiny house, it could be a tent, whatever. Lots of options, again, depending on where you are on the planet. And the idea behind this piece here, this is your retreat center, this is your public-facing center, and there can also be revenue related to all three of these. The red R is revenue. So obviously to maintain a property of 20 or 160 acres, you're going to need some gas for the lawnmower and these kind of things. Obviously we're moving away from that kind of use of fossil fuels and stuff, but there's going to be hard costs no matter where you are on the planet at this time. So revenue considerations, we'll come back to talking about that. But the idea here is you have some temporary people who can stay here. Maybe these are people who are staying for weeks, months, days, or they might even be attending a workshop, that sort of stuff. Over here, we have Hillary and gardening practices. So this could be an orchard if you're in the Okanagan. It could be a Hillary, which is a hemp garden if you're more on the plain, wherever, depending on it's just some kind of gardening that is at a scale where it can create some revenue. I haven't drawn on this map things like greenhouses and composting and toilets and all these kind of like smaller things, bathhouses and stuff. Those can be incorporated or not anywhere. So obviously your gardening is going to probably have some infrastructure stuff which would be included in this little space here in blue. Over here you have level 1 domains. So these are people who are quote unquote living on the land in a more permanent sense. So these would probably be more like tiny houses or actual cabins. These can be on Anastasia style domains at a couple of acres, or they can be much smaller, more like city lots at a quarter to a third of an acre. Over here you have some workshop and other activities, private activities. That could be a big bathhouse, and that's again nestled over here strategically because it's part of this more private area. I also have this space for other down here. This is where your little sexy time shrine and stuff like that might be set up. Stuff that just is not going to be interacting with the public, which is this piece here, because you notice this is your in and you're out. There obviously might be some other exits. Every property will be different. This is just an example. So really encourage you to just see kind of the idea. So there's anywhere from 6 to 16 adults. There can be obviously plus or minus, but that's kind of the range that I foresee that are living, and they're engaged in some of the activities. So the R's are just all revenue opportunities. So different things in the workshop, different things in the garden, different things in the community space, different things related to accommodation, and other potential things can bring in revenue. So a lot of these people ideally will be staying on the property to manage these revenue generating activities as a form of what you might call more commonly like work or a job. It wouldn't be like that, it's a little different, but they would still make money in exchange for time, so it's the same in that manner. Startup hives, you don't see a lot of them today, sadly, because they run into a couple of major problems in getting set up. Worth mentioning on this video, number one, the biggest one that stops them from the get-go is resources. To drop this on the ground, as I've outlined, you're looking at anywhere from if you did it hippie style, to $10 to $20 million. I mean, this community center alone, could be of magnitude. It could also be done for less. It's done in stages over time. I don't mean to use big numbers to be scary, but the idea is that this is hard to do with $50 in your pocket. You generally need a group of people. We're also working under a governance model, which is something I need to speak to. I will speak more to it in city hives, because city hives is the birth of the governance model and comes before this. So the idea is you have so many people who are living in these successful, optimized city hives that they're overloaded, and some of them want to get out into the country to do a startup hive. So they're already engaged in governance models, which is basically conflict resolution, decision making, entry to exit, these kind of things, and all the issues and bits of living in community. It goes without saying that under this model, you're living in community. So if that's not for you, again, this is probably not for you. The second biggest challenge, if you do manage to get access to the property and it has a couple dwellings, or even if you had the $10 million and you set it all up perfectly with a nice epic bathhouse and greenhouses all over the place and whatever else, you then run into the problem of ownership models, because most of these startup hives are in heavily kind of regulated old paradigm counties, such as Rocky View, Mountain View, these kind of places. You're generally under a lot of permit restrictions and this and that's kind of restrictions, which limits what you can do. So that peaceful relationship piece with the matrix is super important, particularly when you want to do some windmills and stuff that might be start getting in their face a little bit more. As we move to the mini hive, we're further and further away and have longer and longer leash in that sense. But if you are having a Hillary, for example, it's one barrier from the road, second barrier from even the public who are on your property. So you're looking at quite protected. Obviously from the air, there's different things. If you don't know about Hillary, it's a hemp garden. It's nothing illegal or unlawful. However, it is a big plot of land that looks like cannabis, marijuana, and that excites people at this time in history. So you have to be mindful of things like that. Especially again in these higher regulated, more hoity-toity type of counties that are often in zone 1 and even spelling into zone 2, especially around the major centers. So I speak to that point in general, that maintaining peaceful relations with matrix is super important. It's paramount, and it needs to be done first at the city hive level, because if you come and drop and do all this, they have the power to come in and just shut it down. We're talking about a set of people who have no ending resources. These people literally print money out of thin air at the cost of 2 cents for a $20 or $100 bill. And so just being mindful that that's not a Goliath that we want to be fighting with, because we never have the time, resources, or desire to do that. So the goal is to have peaceful relations, and when we are setting up in the communities, these little R's are supporting the community. Let's not forget we're going into a collapsing economy almost globally, especially in places like Alberta, where we're having to get off the oil booby and find some more harmonious with nature types of ways of getting by. So that's what we're actually building here in a very soft way. As people get unemployed from other sectors like oil, for example, there might be some part-time work and maybe a little place they could stay for the summer to start and give it a try as a transition. So we're moving to peace, sustainability, and regenerative relationship with the world. So that's number 2, is ownership model challenges. Often with the startup hive, there's a single owner, family or an individual who is maybe leasing or is allowing other people onto their land. And yes, that can absolutely work in thousands of different ways, but I've also seen it not work in lots of different ways. So call it single ownership and veto power ownership models can be a major barrier to the Startup Hive, having a little more equidistant ownership models, which is a conversation for another day. We're going to talk about ownership models and some more governance stuff probably in another video. This is just taking a look at the Startup Hive, getting an idea of what it's looking like physically, where it's situated in the bigger picture. So, and the third challenge that Startup Hives run into, which I think is arguably the resource one is the biggest one, and is why there's not a bunch of them. Because if you had the resources, there'd be a bunch of them, but then they would be failing for this reason: revenue on site. And I've seen this kibosh. The best Startup Hives out there is everyone has a burn rate. So $2 to $5 grand a month is the average humanoid's burn rate in certain communities. Let's just use those numbers for a second. So you need that every month to cover your gas and stuff that you just can't do yourself anymore, food, stuff like this, clothing, blah, blah, blah. And so if you're not able to bring these R's onto the property, then what happens is this driveway here gets really busy with people leaving in the morning to go to the city, and then coming back from the city, and then quickly getting exhausted at that, packing up their little X's and moving into a city hive, because they need revenue. So you need to bring the revenue to them. There will be some people who are on like disabilities or retired or have other revenue sources that will not need regular ongoing revenue, but many people will, most people will. And creating the hive in a way where there are opportunities to stay on the property, which is a super cool place to be, and make a little money, if only part-time, minimizing that zzz back and forth to the city. That's a great way to keep it sustainable, because if there's a way that city hives, startup hives break down, it's too much use of the driveway coming and going, and then people say, oh, why am I driving an hour twice a day, blah, blah, I'm just gonna move to the city, and then they do. Number 4, which I'm gonna add to, is every man, and I'm using man as a capital M-A-N, which includes all the gazillion genders we have these days. Every man needs a castle. And what I mean by that is each one of these X's, and there's probably a couple X's in here potentially, represents a castle. So an individual needs a space, call it a private space, where they can have their stuff. Now this could be as simple as a backpack and a tent. It could be a little yurt, a motorhome, a tiny house, a 2,500 square foot, 25,000 square foot something. And then people have a lot of big castles these days, and a lot of people are busy maintaining their castles, and that's all they do their whole lives. But even the most hippie, most on the land, most don't need anything types of people still need a castle, a roof over their head, a place to put their jacket when they're not wearing it, that sort of thing. So that's what needs to be built into these models as well. So these need to be places that meet the needs, maybe that's hot water, maybe that's power of a certain magnitude to run the shop. So it's really important that the Startup Hive really incorporates that into its model, which is also why there's going to be hard costs, and therefore there needs to be revenue. So I just want to close by saying the Startup Hive comes after the City Hive and before the Mini Hive. And it's a really exciting opportunity. I also just want to point out Hillary here. I'm a big believer that Hillary can be the boosting agent, the active, the oxygen of the Startup Hive, because struggling Startup Hives, I think, can drop a Hillary in to save them, because Hillary can bring a really big R and so many other things, as well as you can start with a Hillary and just a bunch of betas around you, and you can build all this. Hillary, I believe, has the ability over time to give you the resources to build all these other things. And that's exciting. So there'll be more information on Hillary in different videos on that. Just want to thank you for sharing some time with me, learning about the Startup Hive. Do find out how that fits into the bigger model if you're not sure of that piece, and look at some other videos on mini hives and city hives. Namaste.